In the case of Brenda Andrew versus Tamika White, the court looked at whether certain evidence used in Andrew's trial was unfairly prejudicial. They found that the Tenth Circuit made a mistake by not recognizing that the Due Process Clause protects defendants from evidence that could make their trial fundamentally unfair. Nine Robes uses non-partisan, everyday language to focus on the facts of what the Supreme Court is saying. Here, you'll find clear, concise summaries of every Supreme Court opinion, stripped of legalese and clickbait headlines. Each post breaks down the facts, explains the court's reasoning, and highlights the crucial details that often go unnoticed. It's not just about what the court decided, it's about why those decisions matter, to give you a deeper understanding of the cases that define our nation's legal landscape. These summaries are generated by AI. Be careful and consult reputable sources when in doubt. This ruling means that the case is being sent back for further examination. The justices emphasize that there are clear rules about what kind of evidence can be presented in court, and if that evidence is too damaging, it can violate a person's rights. The decision was made by a majority of the justices, with some additional opinions from Justice Samuel Alito, while Justice Clarence Thomas dissented, joined by Justice Neil Gorsuch. This case highlights the importance of ensuring that trials are fair and just, reminding us that the legal system must protect the rights of individuals, even when the stakes are high. The case of Brenda Andrew v. Tamika White arose from the conviction of Brenda Andrew for the murder of her husband, Rob Andrew, for which she was sentenced to death. During her trial, the prosecution introduced extensive evidence regarding Andrew's sexual history and perceived failings as a mother and wife, much of which was later deemed irrelevant. Andrew contended that this evidence was so prejudicial that it violated her rights under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. The Tenth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected her claim, asserting that no established Supreme Court ruling supported the idea that the erroneous admission of prejudicial evidence could violate due process. This led to Andrew's petition for a writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in a per curiam opinion, vacated the Tenth Circuit's judgment and remanded the case for further proceedings. The court clarified that the introduction of evidence that is unduly prejudicial can indeed violate the Due Process Clause if it renders a trial fundamentally unfair. The court referenced its previous ruling in Payne v. Tennessee, which established that the Due Process Clause provides a mechanism for relief against such prejudicial evidence. The court emphasized that the Tenth Circuit had erred in failing to recognize this principle as clearly established law, thus preventing it from properly assessing whether the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals had unreasonably applied this law in Andrew's case. The court directed the Tenth Circuit to consider the prejudicial impact of the evidence separately for both the guilt and sentencing phases of Andrew's trial. Justice Samuel Alito concurred in the judgment but did not express an opinion on whether the high standard for due process violations was met in this case. He acknowledged that a defendant's due process rights could be violated when irrelevant and highly prejudicial evidence overwhelms properly admitted evidence, referencing the same precedents cited by the court. Justice Clarence Thomas, joined by Justice Neil Gorsuch, dissented. Thomas argued that the Tenth Circuit correctly adhered to the principles established under the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, AEDPA, by not broadly interpreting the one-sentence caveat in Payne as establishing a general rule against the admission of prejudicial evidence. He contended that the majority's decision misapplied AEDPA by elevating a vague principle to clearly established law without a specific holding from the Supreme Court. Thomas maintained that the evidence presented at trial was overwhelmingly indicative of Andrew's guilt, and that the introduction of certain prejudicial evidence did not warrant a finding of fundamental unfairness. The legal nuance in this case revolves around the interpretation of clearly established federal law under AEDPA, which requires that a state court's decision must be contrary to or an unreasonable application of Supreme Court holdings. The court clarified that the principle established in Payne, that the Due Process Clause can protect against the introduction of unduly prejudicial evidence was indeed a holding relevant to Andrew's case. However, the dissent highlighted the importance of distinguishing between holdings and dicta, arguing that the Tenth Circuit's interpretation was consistent with established legal standards. The case underscores the tension between the need for fair trial protections and the procedural constraints imposed by AEDPA, particularly in how courts interpret and apply established precedents to new factual scenarios. Find us online at 9robes.ai. That's the number 9robes.ai. Like and share this podcast with friends that like to be informed. 9 Robes provides AI summaries of U.S. Supreme Court cases. AI makes mistakes. People make mistakes too. We genuinely do our best to provide you with the most accurate summaries, but our best sometimes includes errors.